a few minutes to join here. Just wanted to make sure everybody knows you got the link, so you're probably here for the right reasons, but this is a webinar called The Real Conversation About Housing. We have 4 amazing panelists here today to talk to you about the work that they do with the Coalition to End Homelessness in our region. Just want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. There are going to be 40 or so people on this call, so if you could please mute and keep your camera off for the presentation, but when we get to the questions and answers, please feel free to unmute, raise your hand, and let us know that you have a question. Alana McKinney, if you'll give a wave here, Alana, she's our new program administrator. She's going to be helping with the chat and helping us run our webinars. And I just wanted to remind people who we are. Let me see if I can get this and what we do. So we are Housing North. We are a 10-county nonprofit formed in 2018 to address the barriers to housing in our region. We focus on 3 core areas: awareness, advocacy, capacity, and resources. In this series, we're bringing to you today because we work across the income spectrum around housing, from 0% of the area median income all the way up to now about 120 to 150%, where people are still needing to find housing in our region. We're starting with the people doing the work on the ground, addressing homelessness in our region through the Coalition to End Homelessness. And so they are going to introduce themselves, and I will stop talking, but I will let you know that in July, we're going to have another webinar on accessory dwelling units. So stay tuned for that, sort of a part 2 about why those could be a helpful solution in our region. And then we're also going to follow up with this series and focus on our other nonprofit partners and developers doing work around housing, such as Homestretch and Habitat for Humanity and others. So stay tuned for that. And I am going to mute myself and turn it over to Ashley to get us started. Welcome, Ashley.
Thanks, Yarrow. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Halladay-Schmandt, and I am the director of the Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homelessness. And while I'm pulling up the slides, I'll just kind of go through our presenters today and let everybody introduce themselves. Becca, do you want to go next?
Hello, I'm Becca Binder, and I'm the executive director at Northwest Michigan Supportive Housing. Happy to be here today.
Nora?
Hey everyone, I'm Nora Dunlap. I'm the Director of Housing and Homeless Services here at Goodwill Northern Michigan. Happy to be here.
Sarah?
Good morning, I'm Sarah Hughes. I'm the Director of Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency Homeless Programs.
All right, thanks guys. So that's us. Today we'll be talking, we'll kind of go through this overview. Some of it, we're not going to try to get real in the weeds about all of the work that we do to end homelessness, but I hope the presentation will give you a really good overview of what all of the agencies in the Grand Traverse area are doing to make homelessness rare, brief, and one time. And we'll talk about how we end homelessness and what that means. We'll overview the homeless response system, like I said, who's working to end homelessness. And then finally, we'll get into some of the housing needs in our community. So how can we better utilize things like MSHDA housing choice vouchers, what we need as far as development and set aside in the work to end homelessness, and some of the funding that we could use to go along with that. All right. Sorry, I apologize for the voice. All right, so at the Coalition to End Homelessness, we're a collaboration of all of the agencies working together to make homelessness rare, brief, and one time throughout Northwest Michigan. We envision thriving communities where all people experiencing homelessness in a community have access to a variety of housing solutions and supports that they need to end their experience of homelessness. We do this through our values of collaboration, accountability, and data-driven decision-making. Sorry, I'm gonna mute somebody. Okay. So we do all of this work through being accountable to each other, working together, and I mean really, really working together, and I think you'll see that through the presentation today, and making all of our decisions through a data-focused lens. So like I said, we believe healthy, thriving communities have ended homelessness. And when we say ending homelessness, we don't mean that there will never be people experiencing homelessness again. Likely, as long as poverty exists in our country, there will be people experiencing homelessness. So an end to homelessness means that when homelessness does occur for someone, it doesn't happen very often. So we're not seeing it happen time and time again. And we're not seeing it happen very frequently. So it becomes rare. And then when it does happen for someone, it's very brief in duration. It doesn't happen for very long. So if someone enters homelessness, we're able to quickly wrap around them and get them housed, supported, and out of the homelessness system forever, so that it was only that one-time occurrence. And the way we know we're doing this is that we have more people exiting homelessness than we have entering. So sometimes you'll hear us talk about kind of the inflow and outflow of homelessness. We want to make sure that every month we have more people leaving homelessness and exiting to permanent housing than we have entering. And you'll learn about the work that we do to do that in a few. So right now in the greater Grand Traverse region, excuse me, which is Antrim, Benzie, Leelanau, Kalkaska, and Grand Traverse County, there are around 270 people experiencing homelessness right now. And so who are we talking about when we talk about those 270 people? We're talking about people who are sleeping outside, people who are living in tents, campers, vehicles, sleeping rough, so like sleeping on a bench, sleeping in alleyways, places that people are not supposed to live. That's who we're talking about. We're also talking about people staying in temporary emergency shelters. People who are staying in places like the Goodwill Inn or Safe Harbor or other shelters are not housed. They are sheltered temporarily, but they are not housed and they are still homeless. And then when we think about how kind of the income spectrum, Yarrow mentioned this in the beginning, we're talking about our population making about 0 to 30% of the area median income. And then you can see for one person, that means making about 17 to 18,000 a year, and for two people, about 20,000 a year. And that's the top of that range. So now we'll get into work that we do. So I'm going to show a video first, and the video will take us through our homeless response system and what it means to end homelessness for all people experiencing it. We do this through having a comprehensive, equitable homeless response system. And that includes having a call center where folks experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness can call and have access to the services and supports that they need to end their experience of homelessness. We have street outreach, which is a program that meets people literally where they're at. They go out into the woods, into encampments, and help people find housing solutions who are not staying in shelter. We have shelter diversion and rapid exit programs designed for people who don't need a lot of help and might have solutions outside of our system to help them problem solve and exit quickly from our system. Then for those who don't have other solutions outside of our system, we do have temporary emergency shelters, which are a critical part of the homeless response system. But again, that is not the solution to homelessness. Housing is the solution. And so when we think about housing as the solution, we'll get into our two biggest housing programs, which are rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. So each individual here representing an agency will talk about the work that their agency does in the homeless response system. So before we do that, we're going to watch a short video, very short. It's like 2 minutes. So don't lose me yet here. 2 minutes on the homeless response system. We're gonna try. It paused, didn't it?
Ashley,
No
this is
sound.
Yarrow. There's no sound on this end, but I don't know if there's supposed to be sound.
There is. We're not gonna watch the video. So I have no idea how to, I am playing it in the PowerPoint. I'm not sure how to, I guess, make sure that it would have sound.
Yeah, no worries. Well, if the link will be in the PowerPoint, maybe we can just share it after too. So thank you.
Okay, yep, we'll move on. Sorry, guys. Okay, so I will include that link in the PowerPoint, but it really kind of just goes over what we're going to talk about anyway. So I'll hand it over to Sarah to talk about the call center.
Thanks, Ashley. The purpose of the call center is to provide access to the services and supports available for people experiencing homelessness and to end their homelessness as quick as possible. These are the different ways to access the call center. The number one thing to remember and share is our 844 number. And if people call the 844 number, they can press 1 if they're an adult over age 25 and experiencing literal homelessness, and press 2 if they're at risk of being homeless. So if they've gotten an eviction notice or notice to quit, they can press 3 if you have a general housing question. We do have services and resources available for housing in the area. And then press 4 if you're youth age 18 to 24 and you're facing a housing crisis. If you are working with a client or if you know someone who has difficulty on the phone, you can also email one of our homeless emails, whether it's literally homeless at the homeless email on top. Prevention is that at risk of homelessness. If they have housing questions, that one's pretty self-explanatory. And then youth at NMCAA if they're 18 to 24 facing a housing crisis.
Cool. Thanks. You've got one more, Sarah.
The main role of the call center is to provide access to our homeless response system. So the gateway into all of our different programs that we work collaboratively together to end homelessness. The call center staff conduct initial triage and assessment for the caller in housing crisis. They provide referral to the most appropriate housing interventions to end the caller's experience of homelessness. And that includes those diversion services, temporary emergency shelter, street outreach, and potentially temporary financial assistance. The call center can also place people on the MSHDA Housing Choice Voucher with homeless preference waiting list.
Thanks. Now we'll hand it over to Nora from Goodwill to talk about street outreach.
Hey everyone. So I just want to reiterate also something that was on one of the bottom of Ash's slides, which is that all of us orgs are doing different things within the coalition. We have different roles to play and there's sometimes overlap. So I don't want it to be this idea that like, well, you know, only Sarah's org does, you know, intake or anything like that. That's sadly, that does not work. So I just want to kind of reiterate that as we move forward, is there is some fluidity and we do have to be very collaborative as a coalition to serve everyone. And there sadly is just not a lot of room for ego here, which is why I love this work and working with these people, because we are really trying to come up with collaborative ways to meet the needs of our community members. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about street outreach and what that looks like. So street outreach is providing services and supports to people experiencing homelessness in our community. It's focused on, there's a prioritization process, which I'll talk a little bit about, but it's really looking at anyone who's unsheltered to find solutions to end their homelessness. So to kind of put it into the timeline, someone has experiencing homelessness, they've called the call center, they've done that kind of initial intake, and then maybe they're getting a referral to street outreach. The street outreach team, which are super smart and super capable people, literally, like Ashley said, literally meeting people where they're at, literally and figuratively. So figuring out physically where people are, and then also what it is they want to do emotionally, meeting them, matching their emotions, making sure that they have the support they need. And really kind of building a relationship there to get them on the path towards housing. So as Ash said, there's 270 people experiencing homelessness. And sadly, we do not have anywhere near 270 outreach workers as a coalition. So we do a prioritization process in terms of identifying what people's needs are, where they are in terms of their habitat. If they're unsheltered, they're going to have a little bit of different needs. But I want to be clear that street outreach is not the be-all, end-all solution for everyone. A lot of times it's identifying people, that's the first step, but then we're not the ones who are necessarily bringing out the food. We're not the ones who are doing the clothing. We're not the ones, street outreach is not always going to be, helping with pet food, anything that the needs that people have, that's not always what street outreach does. We make connections and we make sure that everyone knows where to go, and that also our community partners are aware of what the needs of those experiencing homelessness are, but we are not the be all and all. So all the services are rooted in housing focused work, and this is kind of going along with that, what I was talking about. So our first step is identifying people, and then it's really kind of engaging them, building that relationship. But really, ultimately, the bulk of what we do is, I think it's extremely sexy work. It's not really super sexy, but it's a lot of housing apps. It's getting people document ready. Maybe they don't have a state ID. Maybe they don't have a social security card. It's helping them get all their documents ready so that they can be ready for housing, ready to apply. It's doing applications. It's dropping off those applications around. It's making connections with SNAP to get people what they need. Maybe they need help with their disability claims, anything like that. We might not be doing it, but we're getting people where they need to be. So it's a really unique job in that you are literally bridging outside, inside, paper, non-paper, all kinds of different people. Every day is different. So street outreach takes a special person, and it's a really special, unique need, working with those experiencing homelessness. Yeah.
You can keep going.
Oh, I get to keep talking. So another component of our response system is temporary emergency shelter. And here in the 5-county area, we have the Goodwill Inn, which is about 120 beds. It's open year round. And that is for those experiencing homelessness. It is not a house. Like Ash said, I want to be clear, like anyone who's sleeping in a shelter is not housed. They are still experiencing homelessness. They just have a roof over their heads temporarily. The Women's Resource Center is available, and they work with those who are victims or those fleeing domestic violence and their families. And then we also have Safe Harbor here in Traverse City, which is a seasonal shelter. It's open usually from November to end of April. So these shelters are, like we said, they're just a temporary place for people to stay. And all of these, the Goodwill Inn is housing first, housing focused shelter, which means while they're staying, we are talking about housing, we're working on the housing plan, and it is not a It's not a permanent home. So that's a key aspect of effective emergency shelter, is making sure that you're talking about housing first. And we haven't really talked about housing first yet here. For those who aren't aware, housing first is the philosophy and model that before you can do anything else, people need to be housed. If someone needs to get sober, it's hard to do that when you don't know where you're going to sleep. If someone needs to get a job, it's hard to know how to apply for a job when you have no idea where, what do you put on that address. All of that, housing is a human right, and we need to be addressing the housing before we can do anything else. So all of our programs that you're going to hear about today are rooted in housing first, and that includes the shelters. Having diversion is an important part. We're clear when you check into the Goodwill Inn that this is not forever. Here's all these different, here's the housing plan, let's start working on it. It's here Wednesdays, we have office hours here, so come on, let's get you the apps, let's get some applications going. And also, Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about our shelter diversion program as well. Our shelters are low barrier, and that means that we're serving those who are the most vulnerable in our community with our shelter. This means that we are not going to set any more kind of demands. You can only stay here if you are sober. You can only stay here if you don't have no criminal record. Those that are the most vulnerable in our community are probably wrestling with some substance abuse, mental health issues, and might have a record. Our job is to make sure that they have a safe place to stay, and not that we're making it harder for them, because they got enough going on. And if we really want to prioritize serving the most vulnerable in our community, that means that we have to be a low barrier access point. We also talked about rapid exit services. That's where we are just constantly listening and being aware of if there's another opportunity. Our outreach workers come into our shelters and are doing work there to make sure that everyone's focused on getting out of shelter and out of homelessness. And we also keep data. So we're constant, not just bed nights, not just head counts or bean counting as we call it in federal grant land, but we're making sure that we're measuring demographics as well as exit information, and we're looking at that constantly. So these are kind of the 5 key things that we are operating under here in our temporary emergency shelter.
Thanks, Nora. All right, now we'll get into shelter diversion. Sarah?
Thank you. Again, as Nora said, we all kind of work together, and diversion happens at every level, whether it's intake, street outreach within the shelter, or this shelter diversion rapid exit program. Shelter diversion services are offered to people experiencing homelessness for the first time. And this program helps to identify safe places to stay outside of the homelessness system. The only predictor of long-term homelessness is becoming homeless for the first time. Diversion is also much more an effective intervention from the perspective of homeless service systems and ending homelessness. Diversion stems the inflow into shelter, so it diverts people who may have some other option that they haven't explored, and keeps those shelter beds open for someone else who needs it and maybe doesn't have that support. It is considerably less costly on average than a shelter stay. Diversion avoids the emergency-related costs of unsheltered homelessness, including ambulance use, sanitation, and interaction with law enforcement. This person that works with shelter diversion rapid exit understands what helps the person understand what caused their housing crisis, and will work alongside them to explore what immediate solutions to the crisis may be possible, and helps them to pursue that solution or solutions.
So I'll just tee this one up a little bit for you, Sarah. So when we think about all of the, like before when I said there's this inflow and outflow into homelessness, the only way into and out of homelessness, the only way we can reach that rare, brief, and one time is to also have interventions on that front end. So those preventative measures, and one of those is the shelter diversion program that Sarah just talked about. Shelter diversion is much more impactful and much more effective at making homelessness rare, brief, and one time than eviction prevention, which Sarah's going to talk about in a second. Eviction prevention is critical in the work to kind of reduce poverty and capture that population that is on the edge of experiencing homelessness. But we want to be really clear, folks who are facing eviction are not the most likely to enter homelessness immediately following that. The people who are the most likely to enter homelessness are the folks who Sarah just talked about, who are going to utilize that shelter diversion program. Eviction prevention, like I said, is more rooted in poverty reduction, but it's something that the homelessness system does provide. And so we would just want to be really clear about, this is not the main intervention to prevent homelessness, but it is still a part of the work. And I'll just let you go into the next one, Sarah, because I kind of just read that one.
Yes.
There you go.
So the target population for eviction prevention are people in that poverty range between below 30% or up to 50% of the area median income, who are experiencing a particular crisis that put them at risk for an emergency shelter stay, possibly in their future, or residing in an unsheltered location. These households who have eviction proceedings initiated are eligible for 3 to 6 months of assistance if they fall within that area median income and they have those eviction proceedings initiated. And this helps to capture those who could make it if they just had a little bit of help. As Ash said, that doesn't mean that they would necessarily enter the homeless system. Not every individual or family doesn't have the supports or ability to live with somebody to, fill that gap. But there are some people who we do capture within eviction prevention and help them move forward. But really, these households are those that may lose their homes to eviction, and the eviction prevention can work with landlords and the client to make sure that they can keep their housing stable.
You can keep going. We're going to get into housing now. So that was kind of like the front end and the emergency type services that we provide. And so now we're going to move into what happens or how do we work to house people permanently. So we'll hear from Sarah first on our shorter term solution, and then Becca on our permanent housing solution.
Yeah, so rapid rehousing is programs that provide short to medium term rental assistance to people experiencing homelessness in order to end their homelessness. Again, we prioritize the people who are literally homeless to enter into a program and try to capture those ones who really have the highest need to house first. And once they're housed, we have case managers who provide supportive services and in-home access to different services, as well as community connections to help them encourage long-term housing stability. So the core components of rapid rehousing helps people find housing fast, helps pay for housing, and helps connect to jobs and services. So the first initial aspect of rapid rehousing is connecting with that person who's been prioritized for a spot in the rapid rehousing program, and then they work alongside the client to find an apartment, and we work with an abundance of landlords progressively, but we're always on the lookout for new landlords. And then depending on the client's need, we help pay for that housing. We have several rapid rehousing programs right now, and they range from 6, 9 to 12 months. And our youth program can pay for up to 2 years, but the main goal is to help get them independent and connect them with the overall services and community support they're going to need to keep their housing stable. I went way off script there, apologize.
No, perfect. Perfect. Right. And now we'll hand it over to Becca to talk about our permanent supportive housing.
Thanks, Ash. So permanent supportive housing, we've kind of talked about this fluid, this fluidity within the homeless response system. And so as our previous partners are talking really heavily about what efforts are happening on the streets to target folks who are currently experiencing homelessness, in hopes to divert them away from any shelter or homeless experience or prevent any entrance into homelessness. What permanent supportive housing does, and Northwest Michigan Supportive Housing is one of our sole scattered site permanent supportive housing providers within our 5-county community. And our focus is really looking at the chronically homeless individuals and families. So what determines chronic homelessness is either a year or more homeless, as well as a disability. And NMSH's focus is primarily with mental health, with mental illness. However, the term chronic homelessness can be either physical or mental illness. And so permanent supportive housing is really a combination of services. It's rental subsidies coupled with case management and supportive services to support folks in their homes. So as Nora spoke to earlier, Housing First is really a model to say, let's get you into this place of safety and stability first. Let's place you into a home. And from there, let's start to identify some of those things that you need to reach your greatest level of independence. I really want to emphasize on the fact that permanent supportive housing, that permanency piece, this is really a population that likely is suffering from severe mental illness, who without these services wouldn't be able to maintain housing on their own. So, 30, 40 years ago, this might have been a population that was typically living within our institutions. And so just to give a little bit of concept there, I think often within this line of work and the work that we do, people have an expectation to be able to support somebody for a short period of time. And then there's this self-sufficiency term. What we like to say is we allow people to reach that greatest level of independence, but we do recognize that not all of them may ever live independently and without these services. And so what are those services? The rental subsidy, rental assistance means that permanent supportive housing can subsidize a unit. Oh, sorry, actually we had, thanks Ash, that permanent supportive housing, will subsidize a unit and make a payment to a landlord directly. And then if a tenant has income, they pay 30% of their income to the organization. And so it really allows that tenant to be able to have an income-based rental. We say that the standard for affordable housing is 30% of your monthly income. And so when we're thinking about kind of these services, we place somebody into a home and that expectation of their rent payment. However, what we really look at is once you're in home, do you have access to income? And if not, is it something where you'll return to the workforce or have some type of earned income that you're capable of doing? Or for some of our folks, we have folks who are on disability benefits, or many who have retirement benefits that they just need assistance in the process of obtaining. And so we really get that income stabilized. And then as well, when we talk about permanent supportive housing, I think we all know that we have to be well internally, mentally, and physically to be able to kind of handle what the world brings us and be able to manage a unit. And so this correspondence between health and housing really drives our permanent supportive housing efforts. So we believe that connection to healthcare providers is one of the first things that we do. As long as somebody is having those needs met, we feel that they're capable to really be able to learn all the other skills that are needed to live within housing, which is anything from tenant and landlord advocacy. So for a lot of these chronically homeless folks, it could be upwards of 5 or 10 years that they've lived in a house. And so we really put importance on knowing what things to communicate to a landlord, what things not to communicate to a landlord, how we can be the liaison between both the caseworkers in permanent supportive housing, really act as liaisons between the landlords and the tenants themselves. And then everything from, treatment if needed to employment services. We have a lot of families who come into our program who are able to get reunified with children. So one of the barriers to their reunification process might be that they need adequate housing for their children. And so placing them into that home in which they can reunify with their children. For a lot of our single individual folks, as Sarah touched on earlier, not all families have the supports or the resources to be able to stay connected with family members or to assist in certain ways. And so once people are stabilized, we can really look at like what family members are in your life that you may be able, you want to reconnect with, whether that be, we've had everything from children, people reconnecting with their children to aunts and uncles, parents, grandparents. And so we really just want to, put that emphasis on meeting their needs, all of the same needs, wants, and wishes that any of us have, but really approaching the tenant within that safety and security of their home, and working on that with them. One of the big things too, as I mentioned, is that safety and security of their home. We also find that it is most effective to work with them in their home. So just as our street outreach team gets up out of their offices and goes out into the community and reaches out to somebody and meets them where they're at, a huge emphasis on permanent supportive housing is that we meet people. We're sitting on couches and chairs with them inside their home, and really working side by side with them to identify those areas of interest for them and what sort of things, the underlining question that we always ask, and I'll say we as all of us as housing providers, one of those underlying questions I think that we commonly ask is, what do you need so that you don't return to homelessness again? What are the points in which led to your homelessness, and how can we prevent that from happening again? There are gaps that exist. And so, one of the things is we have rental subsidies. We are, some of us are HUD, well, all of us are HUD funded organizations, and some of those HUD funds allow us to provide for the rental assistance side of things. However, we do need units to do that. And so as we're looking at a community that has increasing rental rates, how's an organization like ours staying competitive? And so Sarah touched on as well, we work really hard to try to engage landlords and bring in acquiring new rental units so that we create a system that can address homelessness, and as Ashley mentioned, end homelessness, which means when somebody comes into it, there's not a long backlog. But to do that, we have to have the housing. We have to be able to have adequate and sufficient housing so that these programs can move people swiftly into housing, out of homelessness, and help to start to address the areas of their need. Next slide, please, Ashley. So one of the things I want to touch on in the cost of homelessness too, is we've mentioned a couple of times that, shelter is not housing. And something that really rang true to me is, or has always stuck with me, is a few years ago, somebody said to me, we said, it's housing is a basic human right. And they said, well, shelter is a basic human right. And we provide shelter, right? We provide homeless shelters for folks. So from a health and wellness and also a community cost, it is way more costly to have somebody residing on the streets and living in shelters than it is on an annual basis to live in a rental of their own. So I want to just kind of focus on some of the elements that play into that. So overall, poor health outcomes, people living on the streets, anything from, in our winter months, frostbite to pneumonia, to the dangers of just living within the elements, being struck by a vehicle, being assaulted or, endangered. All these are things that people who are experiencing homelessness face on a daily basis. With that, because it is dangerous to live homeless, there is a high utilization of emergency services. And so we see everything from, somebody who has, somebody who has had an assault that's happened to them, or they've, been living in the rough winter elements, and they are showing up at our emergency room. They're not stable in life to kind of have that primary care doctor that they're following up with on a regular basis, because you're living in a state of crisis and living in a state of emergency. And so where do you go but to the ER when you have any medical need? And that puts a strain on our emergency room. Additionally, people who are often living on the streets, whether there be the combination of mental illness and also substance use, that co-occurring disorder can often provide for people to have psychotic episodes. And so what happens? But the police are called, and then EMTs are called, and then people are admitted to psychiatric centers. And this is all a high cost. Those are much higher costs to maintain and operate those resources than it is to place people in housing. And just a significant obstacle to achieving wellness when you're living in that. I mean, I can count on one hand the amount of times and that one might have been to an emergency room. When you're living on the streets, your encounters with the police and emergency services and the emergency room, that might be part of your everyday or weekly routine. And so there's some numbers here that I want to just share on, and these are provided from a regional perspective from the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. And so for somebody, the cost per the community cost per year for one person experiencing homelessness on the streets is upwards of $35,000. For NMSH to house and support one individual for a year is $14,300. So we're even just seeing a tremendous cost benefit to being able to have, to really shifting our line of work and our efforts to placing people into housing first and foremost, and ending homelessness in the community. Not only is it cost effective, but is it also what's right for folks, right? Because we know from that place of, again, safety and security, but I say it a lot because safety and security is not what people feel when they live on the streets. And so really from that place in their homes, that's where they can really start to evaluate, what are the things that I want in life? How can I start to rehab and work on myself and meet my goals? And I'll hand it back over to you for a couple minutes, Ashley.
Thanks, Beck. So yeah, to kind of keep moving on our housing training here, now I'll talk about another type of housing solution that we have in our communities. And I think I just want to hit on one thing that Becca just said. When we think about, we had a previous slide talking about thriving communities have ended homelessness. And I think this slide really speaks to that. Thriving communities are not communities where we're spending over $35,000 a year for one individual experiencing homelessness, accessing our emergency services and draining those services, right? When we house someone, we're better able to meet the needs of that community member in housing in a more humane way, in a safer way, and a more cost-effective way for our communities. So thanks for sharing that, Beck. So now we'll talk about the MSHDA Housing Choice Voucher Program. I will say that this is not a Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homelessness program. This is a state program or a state administered program that is part of the federal Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's formerly called Section 8. So if you're familiar with Section 8 vouchers, that's what we're talking about. In our state of Michigan, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, MSHDA, administers these vouchers. They administer approximately 28,000 vouchers across the state of Michigan. The purpose of these vouchers is to ensure that critical long-term housing subsidies are directed to those who have low income. And then what MSHDA has done is provided a homeless preference on the vouchers. So people experiencing homelessness have better access to these vouchers in our state and in our community. So people who qualify for the homeless preference vouchers are people who are literally homeless. And those are the people that we've been talking about all all of today, and then folks who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. And so what that means is the waiting list for these vouchers never closes for those people. The waiting list for these vouchers kind of generally for people who have low income does open and close. It's not always available to go on, but for people experiencing homelessness or who are fleeing domestic violence, it's always open for them. So right now we're seeing pretty high rates of people having an opportunity to use their vouchers, meaning their names do get pulled from the waiting list pretty often, but what we're not seeing is them actually being able to find a unit and lease up on the vouchers. So every year we have vouchers in our community going unused, and when they go unused for year after year, we lose them completely. And so this is another way that affordable housing isn't being met in our community for the people who need it the most. So this is an awesome resource. It can really help us get to that place where we are a thriving community, where homeless numbers are low, where we're reaching that rare brief in one time. However, we can't utilize these as much as we'd like. The pricing for the vouchers is right around $949 for a 1-bedroom if all of the utilities are included. So I don't know if anybody's been in the rental market lately in Traverse City, much higher than that for a 1-bedroom. We're looking at Traverse City is right up there with Washtenaw County in Ann Arbor right now, with one of the highest rental markets in our state. Wages, as we know, aren't also the highest in our state. And we've got all these really vulnerable people in our community that just aren't able to get to that higher rental market. So even for a 2-bedroom, the limit is right around $1,100. So again, not there. And then the other reason we can't use these vouchers here as much as we'd like is there's just not enough housing available. So even if the rental market was a little bit lower here, the unit availability is not there in our community to utilize these vouchers. So MSHA is helping us out. They're gonna host on June 23rd a landlord outreach event. So what they're gonna do is host this event for anyone and everyone who's interested about the vouchers, who'd like to potentially become a landlord. If you've ever had questions about what this voucher program is and how to utilize it, please attend to this event. It's from 5 to 6:30. You can register online. It is virtual. And they'll also be talking about bonus payments and landlord incentives. We'll talk about that in a minute as well, but there are those opportunities available if you'd like to be a landlord on the voucher program. All right, so now we'll get into ways you can help. So one of the biggest, we get a lot of questions around how can I help? And a lot of people in our community want to do good things. They want to help us out. And one of the biggest ways that we can help or that you can help in homelessness is to advocate for more affordable housing in our community. And when I'm talking about affordable housing, I'm talking about housing for people who are the most vulnerable. I'm not referring to higher income workforce development. We are talking about housing specifically for people making 0 to 30% of the area median income. And we've talked about that further in our presentation. We're also talking about set-aside units for people experiencing homelessness. Becca will talk about how we've made that work in our community and how we need more of those. And then finally doing more landlord outreach. We have incentive programs. We need people to take vouchers. We need people to work with the agencies that we've heard from today to house more people experiencing homelessness. So if you live in Traverse City or in the surrounding area, probably if you live in the United States of America, you've heard about the housing shortage and the housing crisis that our country is facing. It's not unique to rural areas. It's not unique to big urban areas. It is every community in our country. So when we think about these large, complex social issues that we face, when we're thinking about marginalized communities, like people experiencing homelessness, they are affected at much higher rates than just the general population. So yes, affordable housing in our community is a need, but when we're thinking about people experiencing homelessness, it is a much dire need. We have people every year dying on our streets because we don't have enough affordable housing. So we're not here today talking about we need more single family homes in our community for people making, over $100,000 a year. We're talking about we need set aside units for people experiencing homelessness so they do not die on the streets of our community. So ways we can do that are having more local control of short-term rentals. That's a big advocacy point and a big thing that Housing North is working on, even within our state legislature. So I'd encourage you to get involved on Housing North's email list and on their website to learn more about the work to provide more local control of short-term rentals. And we'll talk in a second about how that's affected people experiencing homelessness. Another way to get involved around advocacy is to join the Legislative Action Committee through the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. It's not us, it's one of our state partners, but you can find them, and we meet monthly to talk about ways we can engage federal and state legislators around issues facing people experiencing homelessness. And then finally, local housing advocacy tips from Housing North. They have a great resource on their website, and I've linked it here, on ways that you can help advocate for housing issues in our community. And then I will hand it over to Becca now to talk about set-asides.
Thanks. So as Ashley said, set-aside units is one of the ways that we're really trying to work on a local level to be able to expand our housing inventory and stock for the coalition. I do want to just touch on what kind of options for homelessness programs are. So set-aside units is when a particular development or property specifically is built solely for the use of coalition-related programs or dollars. Then there are also private landlords within the community, and that's called, so we refer to that as scattered sites. So there are also just private landlords in the community, and we engage with their scattered site rentals. And that's just the leasing up one-on-one with a private landlord and the organization, and then a tenant's able to move in there. And then there's also project based units. So when we talk, what's interesting about set aside units for rural communities is we're finding it to be a lot more effective in being able to acquire housing at more frequent rates than maybe in urban communities, large developments. So a complex of 300 units might be built to be able to house people who are formerly homeless. One of the things with set-aside units is it also emphasizes integration within the community. So what we believe is that it's healthy for people, regardless of whether they've ever experienced homelessness in their life. It's healthy for people to be able to live in community with others. So I want to focus a little bit on kind of what that means for us. So the coalition, NMSH, owns certain properties. So as you'll see on this slide, it kind of gives you an idea of where we're located in the community currently, and then I'll touch on some of the places that we're expanding to. So NMSH specifically owns those top 6 properties there: 3 Mile, 12th Street, Titus, Fair, Bayfront, and Woodmere. And then we also have partnerships. So the cottage, and I'm sorry, that's supposed to say cottage 36 lofts instead of 26, but cottage 36 lofts is in the Grand Traverse Commons, which many of you, if you're locally, you know the Commons. And there are units up there. And so NMSH has a contract with Cottage 36 Lofts to hold 3 units. So we have kind of the master lease on 3 of those units. What these mean is that when somebody is entering into a program, the units that are owned by NMSH, we're able to just house directly into if we have a vacancy. But set aside units means that I'll pick on Cottage 36 Lofts, when they have somebody move out of their apartment, they have a very long wait list that people have to apply and get back into. And what partnerships for set aside units allows is that NMSH holds and secures those 3 units. So if we have somebody move out, it doesn't go back to the standard wait list, but rather it stays held with NMSH, and we're able to house the next eligible person into that unit. And so that really allows us, not only as we see these increasing housing prices and challenges with engaging landlords, it allows us just to always know that we have at least units within the community. It also creates good and healthy partnerships. So our neighbors, we don't identify to say, these are 3 apartments for people experiencing homelessness, but it's just healthy neighborly community in which people can live, and it kind of goes into that overall like wellness for their life. So those are the units, those top ones that I focused on there. And then Brookside Commons, we have 2 units that's over on the west side of town. And we have 2 units over there as well that NMSH holds. So again, it's the same permanent supportive housing as normal. We meet clients in their homes, we go out to those properties, but it really just allows us to always know we at least have those rentals. And then where we are expanding, so the ones that are highlighted in yellow, so Home Stretch is working on building a development both in Leelanau County and then one on Carver Street as well in Traverse City. And then if many of you are familiar with Common Grounds, which is going up on 8th Street, 8th and Boardman, right downtown by the Government Center. So what we've done is, about 2-3 years ago, when those developments started to announce that they were going to be building, we reach out. So I went and met with those developers, and really we engage with them in a way to say, would you dedicate 2 or 3 units? So you've got development going up in the community. It's within a price range that we can pay. Would you dedicate those units to NMSH and enter into this memorandum of understanding so that those are held, and we as a coalition are expanding our inventory and intake? It makes it, as we've talked a lot, the increasing housing prices, and we'll get a little bit to it on the next slide, but it makes it really challenging to keep and engage landlords when you are a HUD funded program, right? We have limited dollar amounts, and we have landlords who are saying, I have somebody with cash who can pay me over asking for the next 6 months. So it just makes it really challenging how do we compete in with that? And so we felt that this approach really designated, you have a development going up. We don't need the whole complex to be designated for people experiencing homelessness, but would you carve out 1 or 2 units and work with us on that? And so we've had great success, as you can see, with doing that. And then the project-based vouchers, as I mentioned, those are also, as Ashley talked about the housing vouchers earlier, that's a similar way that housing vouchers are associated with an apartment complex. And so supports are provided in those locations as well. And then New Waves Church is the other one in Leelanau County. I don't know if anybody's been following, but they have quite a large development that's going on out there. And that's very holistic focused as well, of looking at not only just creating housing for people, but everything to, it's that community base. I'd like to give an example of what that means, but we had a tenant a while ago. So he was living in one of our private landlord our private landlord rentals, and just off Keystone Road. And he was outside his house, and part of his lease requirement was that he had to snow blow the driveway or shovel the driveway every winter. And he didn't have a vehicle, but that was part of the lease, and he needed to be able to keep it clear. And so we had gotten him a shovel, and he was out there, and it was a really long drive, and he's shoveling the driveway. And his neighbor next to him had a snow blower, and he's snow blowing his house. And so our tenant and the neighbor get to talking. And what he said is, hey, I'll go shovel all your back porches and your deck and your stairs I'll do all the shovel work and the handwork for that. Would you mind to take your snow blower and run it a few times pass over my driveway? When we talk about integration and community and that type of healthy community living, that's not our intent is not always to be the sole providers of support and resources for people, but to really give them that platform and foundation so that they can take it and run with it. We do know that not all of our tenants might ever reach that type of level, but for the majority of the people that we serve, that's why we want them in community. That's why we want set aside units. And that's what allows them to really be able to prevent that return to homelessness and start to gain those skills needed to remain housed. Next slide, please, Ashley. And I'll kind of start and then hand it over to you if that's okay. So one of the things I did when we were talking about this presentation today and really in our prep work, I had been looking over what our landlord list looks like. And in the last 5 years, NMSH has lost 23 landlords, which feels like a huge amount to us. That's 23 landlords, and some of those landlords had more than one rental unit. So some of the reasons for that is conversion to short-term rentals. So we've had specific landlords who have sold their units solely to turn them over to short-term rentals. We've really experienced that in the downtown Grand Traverse City area. A lot of those rentals that we had worked with, with mom and pop landlords for years, started to be sold, and people came in and those short-term rentals were converted, and they were converted into short-term rentals, excuse me. Selling properties in the private market. So also, as the cost of housing is increasing and we're seeing that, it's a seller's market, people have decided, we've worked with landlords for 20 years, but they're no longer, in a place or capacity to be able to maintain those rentals. And so they sell them, and they're either sold, to a private family or somebody coming in for that short-term rental who's not interested in working with us. And I'll say as well, a lot of that experience, the new owners coming in, we've experienced a high volume of those being people from out of the area, out of the community. So either second homes, summer homes, or, people relocating, moving into the area. And then some people keep their rentals, but they don't want to work with us anymore because they can make more money in the private rental market. A 1-bedroom in Traverse City for what we can pay is just upwards of $850 a month. And that doesn't include utilities. And so we're seeing 1-bedrooms daily going for about $1,200. So just our ability to stay competitive with it is really challenging. So we continue to work. The set aside units have really been the most successful for us. We are able to carve out small units, continue to expand our inventory, and keep those landlord relationships growing as well. NMSH alone has 47 private scattered site landlords that we work with all throughout the 5-county area, densely in Grand Traverse, just as that's where the majority of resources and the population lives. But we continue to work with those landlords and continue to approach new properties for those set aside units. There are, for those landlords, there are some incentives. So I'll pass it back over to you, Ashley, if you kind of want to expand on that.
Yeah, thanks, Becca. As you can probably tell, housing is the way we end homelessness. And so we need more landlords. And that's a way that, again, the community members can really help us, is to engage people talk to your friends, talk to business owners, talk to people who have rentals, to come on board and really work to help make our communities better. And we do have landlord incentives, and I'm going to let Sarah talk a little bit about those.
So right now we do have a new rental landlord who signs a lease with a client can receive up to $1,500 just for signing with us, and or any program within our coalition. And if it's a landlord that's returning to us, that is also available for them. And then we have damage fees up to $2,000. So this is above and beyond the security deposit. And we really think of these damage fees more as in like their son hit a baseball through a window. So a window needs to be replaced, but we don't want to jeopardize their housing. We want to get it replaced. So we will just go forward and get that replaced because most of our clients don't have the ability to pay for those one-offs or if something is damaged. So it is working really closely with the landlords and supporting them while we're supporting our clients.
So if you do know somebody who's interested in that, in becoming a landlord and needs kind of landlord or would benefit rather from landlord incentives that Sarah just talked about, you can contact the Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency, or you can contact any of us. I'll put my contact info on the next slide and we'll connect you with that. And then finally, I'm going to try to go backwards here. One of the other things I wanted to touch on here, and I'll hand it over to Nora, is also like kind of expanding on what Becca said about development. We're not going to kind of like build our way out of this problem, but we need more development. We need more housing. If we don't have more housing, we won't have more set-aside units for our folks. And so I'm going to hand it off to Nora to kind of talk about that need a little bit. And then after that, we will open it up for questions.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's really interesting because housing, everyone's talking about it and everyone's talking about development and there's real energy and it's awesome. And now is the time. But the challenge that I'm seeing and where I think the call for help is we need to think differently about how we do affordable housing. Ash talked about how we have all of these HCV vouchers, but we can't use them. And we know that they're guaranteed cash. They're guaranteed cash in pockets. When a developer takes their pro forma to a bank to get underwritten, you can't count HCVs as revenue. It's crazy. So there's just kind of these antiquated ideas where there's two sides not talking to each other. So we know that there's a way to do this. It just requires thinking differently. Goodwill is really interested at looking at supporting developments maybe that need help, getting that, closing the gap on their funding stack so that they can break ground. There's different ways that we can talk about this. We also know that we want to do more standalone PSH units like Carson Square is 100%. Those are really hard to do, and those actually are really difficult to do without getting a giant LIHTC thing, which comes from the IRS, which is, it's just very slow and cumbersome. So I just kind of wanted to open it up to hear that, anyone who's here who's maybe in finance or banking or a concerned community member, or I know we have people from, there's a lot of people on this call that we want to think differently, and we don't believe in any sacred cows when it comes to this, when it comes to talking about how to get some more units available, because we frankly have seen that status quo doesn't work for these most vulnerable people. It helps, but there's got to be a different way that we can become more nimble and really kind of meet the needs and become that thriving community that every single strategic plan in Traverse City area and in the greater Grand Traverse area talks about wanting to be. So that's kind of the call there is, I'm sure there's our contact information, but we're really open to talk about things differently.
Thanks, Nora. All right, so that's it. Like Yarrow said, if you want to put a question in the chat, or you just want to come off mute or raise your hand or whatever you're most comfortable with, we can answer questions.
While we give people a minute to put their questions in the chat, I just want to thank you all. I think that was very informative, and thank you for your time and your expertise and the work that you're doing. I guess to start things off, I would just ask, how can Housing North or other organizations share the information, Sarah, that you have about landlord incentives? Because I do think that is something we could help with right now. And I think that is really important to let people know that that's available.
I can definitely send you our flyer that has the landlord agreement on the incentives, and you can share that.
Thank you. Alana, I think there was one question in the chat. Did you want to start by asking that? And I'll look through these here.
Yeah, someone was curious about how many calls come in at the call center.
But
Give me a second and I'll,
Oh, okay.
I
ahead,
can give
Ashley.
you the number. Just give me a
Okay.
second.
I just want to say that it isn't a live answer call center. With the numbers of calls that come in and the very abundance of different needs for clients, it is you call, leave a message, and then you get a call back within 24 hours. Usually they're same day callbacks. We try really hard to get people called back within, that first day that they called, to make sure that their needs are being met. And obviously our calls have priorities, so the literally homeless and the youth will be answered quicker.
So it looks like we have some questions just about boarding houses or hostel style community living. Are any of those ideas viable here, or looking at, industrial buildings being converted to apartments? Maybe Nora or somebody could speak to that.
The community dwelling piece is one that we know it can work. Shared housing is often what it's called. Sadly, the voucher system is not as nimble as our needs are. So it really is, sadly, like if you had a 2-bedroom, we see this all the time. Can't we just put 2 individuals with their individual vouchers into that 2-bedroom? Sadly, no, that's not how that works. Same thing with kind of the communal living. I know that HUD has a pilot. They're looking into it. It's kind of an innovation way. They're trying it out in different ways, and we'd like to be able to do it. I think that it all comes down to money, right? So we as organizations can't, we're not, we're utilizing tools that are already out there to pay for the rent. And so when a developer or someone's looking at doing this money, or doing their stack, their proposal or pro forma, they need to be able to show that they can pay for things 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line. So if we don't have, a HUD backed or something that we can talk to that will show the cash flow happening, and if it's not proved, and our org, sadly, we don't, we can't really supplement as much as we would like to. That's the sticking point. We would love to try to be involved and set aside units as we can. It's just all comes down to the cold hard cash living in this capitalist society. So yeah, it's and the same thing with the industrial kind of turning things around. It's the same thing. There's a lot of EPA requirements and environmental things when you're looking at doing housing in general, especially if you're going to do housing that involves federal money. The amount of there's more hoops to jump through, more environmental processes that you have to show that the place is safe, and 1,000 different ways that you think would never be there. It's just kind of hard and sticky. And when the dollar speaks as loudly as it does, it's just not worth it for a lot of developers to try to do it. So that's kind of why I put that call. We're putting this call out. Like, what else can we do? Because the current system ain't working.
Thanks, Nora. Someone else asked in the chat, who would be the best contact for someone with a criminal record looking for housing in the Traverse City area?
So I just wondered, and Bonnie, you can throw it in the chat, if the person is returning from prison, because there is a specific program for prisoner reentry. Okay, yes. So that is the, what is it, MPRI, Michigan Prisoner Reentry Program. And it is through the Michigan Department of Corrections locally, and for Benzie County, that program is run out of Networks Northwest. Yes, now called Offender Success. Lydia's on the call.
So I just wanted to piggyback on a few things Nora had said. So if there are changes to be made at the federal, and state level regarding vouchers and how we can include that in say the capital stack or make some changes, how do you think we could start? Or do you have any ideas? Do we go directly to the top, maybe for the group here? I mean, obviously we're doing work on the state level, but just, wonder if you have any thoughts on that or who people could contact to share, their concerns about that.
Specifically about the housing choice voucher program?
Yeah, or just ways we could make changes within the system, both, federally, and I mean, it's a huge question, so I don't expect that, like, right now, would it make sense for people to call MISHDA and voice their opinions on this and just let them, or is there any pathway maybe to share that, I guess, more than what we're already doing?
Sure. So federally, good luck. And right now we're just kind of in a, what I would suggest is to get really informed about it and informed about the ways you can impact the legislation federally, is get hooked up with the National Alliance to End Homelessness, NAEH. So we don't have like lobbyists, right, through NAEH, but they're most connected. They're in DC. They are meeting with congressional reps all the time. And Steve Berg, one of their people on the Hill, kind of talking to the legislators about this constantly, just put out a blog the other day of kind of like where we're at nationally and where there are, like, I think he highlighted 3 advocacy points. So I'd be happy, I can share that blog in the chat. And that would be kind of your best route federally. I will say also, MISHDA typically, you can go to their website, michigan.gov/MISHDA, and they'll have kind of your avenues for contacting them. And they will always I think it's annually, they'll put out like a public comment period on their housing choice voucher. And then I believe the state plan, they'll have periods that are open for public comment, and they'll do hearings. And so you can just stay tuned to MISHDA and our newsletter too. I'll put that out when those are open. Nora, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, kind of thinking, think big, act local, right? Like I would really encourage anyone who's looking at acquiring properties or developing even small scale stuff. That set aside thing is there for a reason. We can make those pro formas work with the HCV. We can figure out how to get things underwritten for certain traditional debts with this kind of cash flow guarantee. We have a lot of capital as a coalition that we can help, not just the other thing that we can do is we talk about all the time about all the what housing-based case management is, which is done by NMSH and NMCAA and Goodwill. We're all doing it. It's an integral part of making sure that we keep that outflow out and moving and staying there. So we can make stacks and pro formas work. We just need to have an opportunity, and we have to think about ratios a little differently. But for anyone who's really, this is what innovation is, right? Innovation comes out of need, or something like that, I believe is a famous saying. So I think that we're really we're positioned with the energy around housing and with all the knowledge and the need. I think we could really do something transformative in this community in terms of ending homelessness in a way that everyone, including capitalist pocketbooks, are met. So
I was just going to reiterate that as well. I think we talked earlier about the cost of homelessness. And I think that, there are different reasons that people feel driven to address address homelessness and take action and find solution. And that, might be anything because it's personally related to them. They know somebody who's impacted or suffering, or looking at it and just that education standpoint of what it also means for, wellness for our community, and from a cost standpoint, is a huge piece. And just that it's a priority, as Ashley's talked about a lot earlier, in the communities that, have successfully done this. And I'm proud to be a part of the Northern Michigan community, because I think we're well on our way to, to doing it, and we're structured well within a coalition. But we need the community to believe that it is a top priority. And when we as a whole community, everything from our local governing sectors, then we will be able to really, move the needle and shift this. So I think too is, a simple call to action is just reach out to us if you need more information, but talk about what you heard and learned here today, and make it present at your local, commissioner meetings, and if it's declared a priority, then we can easily handle and tackle it.
Thanks,
And I just
Becca. That
wanna
was well
answer-
said.
Yeah, can I just answer that call thing? I found the data. So that question about how many calls. So in the month of May, just from the greater Grand Traverse, like that 5-county area that we're talking about today, the call center received 203 calls, most of which were not homeless callers. 115 were not people experiencing homelessness. 6 were at risk, and 82 were actually homeless. So the call center is fielding all sorts of calls for people having housing needs and questions in our region. But that information is also available on our website, which is endhomelessnessnmi.org. You can find all sorts of stuff, including that video I couldn't get to work, and some data that you might find interesting.
I'll give people another chance for questions. We'll kind of look around, but I think, that we're at our hour-and-a-half mark here, which we were targeting, and just want to thank our panelists again for your time, your expertise, the work you do, and remind people you can save the chat. I put it in the chat, but if you right-click and want the links, it's in the chat. You can save it on your computer, and then we will send out a follow-up email, as Alana had indicated and I'd indicated, with the links, the PowerPoint, and the copy of this recording. So please, reach out with any questions, help us with the call to actions you heard. And I think everyone on the panel, including Alana and myself, are available to help with questions. So does anybody have anything else, closing remarks or anything else they want to say? Looking around in Zoom land. Okay, well, hopefully we'll start to do some of these gatherings too in person, but I know Zoom is convenient and nice to be able to save things and have a record of it too. But thank you again to our panelists, and please stay tuned for future webinars and workshops.